What up, Marsh Pod? I'm jacked for this episode, man. I'm really excited. Pointless Power Rankings, our fourth version of this. I know I might have played my hand a little bit yesterday, or rather Tuesday's pod, but that's not dissuading me from doing this thing, running this thing back. Typically, we don't go back-to-back pods talking about the same team or teams, but we're doing it. I thought that the last couple weeks hadn't been showing enough love to the teams at the top. And so it's time to do that. That doesn't mean all you mid-level teams aren't going to get your dues, but play better, we'll talk about you. Play worse, we'll talk about you. Some cases, just being mediocre means you stay out of the spotlight for better and for worse. So regardless, we're jumping in. Pointless Power Rankings, like I said, our number 4. We're recording this on Wednesday before all of our games. So I looked at the schedule and I said, look, there's no outcome that would drastically change my opinion of any of these teams. I think they would still be slotted in, win or lose, tonight based off their performances. So we can jump in and we're just going to get right to it. Number 10, Best Coast Ballers. They remain at number 10. From last week or from last month. And the reason is I know they just beat Gotham 5, but I'm very concerned about the long-term future for this group. No Mikey Williams, no more June. We've seen what an LDO team looks like. An LDO-led and operated team. They lost early on in the playoffs, won a game, and that was basically it. I think that they're a very real team to be able to actually fall out of the top 10 altogether. I think that if you get a team like Run DMV, who's won 2 in a row, Yacht Club, if they straighten things out, Bad Boys, Lakeshore Drive, some of those teams that sit kind of like at 500, not quite above it. If any of those teams get hot, they have a shot at taking down Best Coast Ballers, because I think there's a very real chance that this team starts dropping in the rankings. But they're number 10. It's as much of a forward look as it is a previous look. Number 9, falling 3 spots from number 6, is Southeast Select. And real quick, I'm going to go back. We're going to give our top 10 from last time. Bay Area was number 1, Originators 2, Lone Star 3, Showtime 4, Rocky Mountain 5, Southeast Select, just said 6, Beast of the East 7, H-Town Hoopers 8, South America, 9, and then Best Coast Ballers was 10. That was last month. This month, we're 9. Southeast Select, as I said. I really wanted to put them higher. I actually had them higher originally, and then I started kind of digging deeper and say, okay, why are they that high on your list? And then I was like, I think they need to go lower. And for half a second, they were at number 10, and then I said, well, I just don't like what Best Coast looks like in the long run, which is why I ended up with them at number 9. This feels right. Landing here felt right, and here's why. They lost to Africa most recently. That's a bad loss. I don't care what Ajay Feshbenlay did. I know he was Player of the Week, but that's still a bad loss. They've been blown out, they blow out Bay Area, though. That made me want to put them higher. That's a great win. But that was also a win in which I know Bay Area was trying out a new defensive scheme. It's a Bay Area team we'll talk about who's been trying a lot of things to solve a defensive issue. That was a game in which they tried it, and Southeast Select torched them for it. For me, that win is an asterisk. The rest of the Southeast schedule, lost to Lone Star Basketball Club, lost to Best Coast Ballers, lost to Showtime. Typically, a head-to-head would have Best Coast above them, but again, we just talked about Best Coast. That's why Southeast is here. They have played a really difficult schedule, so the fact that they are 6-4 is a good thing, but 2 straight losses, and they just haven't been as good of a team as you would want against those big teams. They just haven't been that group. So for me, I said it on last month's issue, they're kind of a tier 2, maybe at the top of it. I think they're settling now. They're down towards the bottom of that tier 2. If they win it, I wouldn't be surprised type of team. And I think everybody in this top 10 is tier 2 and above. They're kind of in the middle to bottom of that, obviously considering they're not number 9. All right, moving to number 8, H-Town Hoopers. They stayed right at number 8. With any top team, this is what I like to do. I say, okay, do I like them? Yes or no? All 10 of these teams, the answer is yes. Okay. With any team from there, I say, what have you done? What among that group of competition jumps off the page to me as impressive? Houston The H-Town Hoopers, they don't have that game. What's their signature win? Yacht Club, they're 5-4. Europe, they're 5-5. Cascadia, they're 5-6. I understand you only can play who you've played, which means they could quickly jump up these rankings by the next time we bring this out. There are games in May and then the first day of June. Bay Area coming up, Southeast, Run DMV, Beast of the East, and then Showtime on June 1. They string some wins together. They get 4 wins out of that, 3 wins out of that. That's signature. That moves up. But until that starts to happen, it's hard for me to say, yeah, let me take H-Town over any of these 7 teams that are above them, because they haven't proven to be able to do that. Every other team on this group above them has won a game that you can point to and say, that matters. H-Town doesn't have it right now. All right, number 7, dropping 3 spots is Showtime. They have the most head-scratching losses, in my opinion, of any team near the top of SimWorld Hoops. Lost to Asia Pacific, lost to Gulf Coast Lockdown, lost to the Queen City Kings. At the same time, you could take their big wins and you could stack them up against anybody, and they might have the best wins. Wins over Bay Area, wins over Best Coast, wins over Southeast. Those are meaningful. Bronny is an elite scorer. He's the type of guy that you can turn to when the game's on the line, and they've done it plenty of times. But stop me if you've heard this before. What else do they have? Nobody else has been productive as a singular playmaker. There was the Bryce James game a couple weeks ago. But outside of that, I want to see more. I want to see more from Corey Yams. I want to see more from these guys that are supposed to be the number 2, number 3, number 4 guy in the pecking order. They have not shown up. Add on to that the coaching chaos that surrounded them and not really being sure of what is this team's approach in the long run. All of that to me is concerning. It's not concerning enough to say they're not better than a mid-tier team, but it's also concerning enough for me to say I don't think they're better than any of the teams above them. All right, number 6, and I'll be honest, I don't love that they're here, but I couldn't justify to myself moving them up further, although I think there's a real case for it, and that's number 6 is Gotham 5. Last month they were unranked. They had a tough start to the season, and then number 2 the month before that. So they've stabilized. In the recent weeks, they've stabilized. They spanked Rocky Mountain. They had a close loss to Best Coast, and they've played 3 teams in my top 10 and are 2-1. Beasts of the East they beat, Rocky Mountain they beat, and of course they lost closely to Best Coast. Mackenzie Mbako has started to be quietly, consistently good. I haven't seen it mentioned a lot in any of these threads that, hey, he's been a pretty good to above average player right now. Now look, enter the season as number 2. We shouldn't be celebrating above average. But he's starting to stabilize himself, which has in turn stabilized this team. And that matters because Gotham 5 has always been that under Tim Bilardi. Always being, a season in 2 months. I get it. But that's kind of what they do. You look at last year, they entered with Shea King, and it was this, hey, it's Shea King, it's Jalen Snow. It's their world, they're going to run it. Jalen Snow had great numbers. Shea King was kind of like, are we sure about this guy? Not because he wasn't good, but because the system doesn't create individual superstars. That's kind of where Mackenzie Mbako was and now is he's fitting in and being exceptional at that role. All of that matters, right? In the coming weeks, I think they've got a shot to move up. They've got those games coming up against good teams. They had the win most recently over Bay Area. As those kind of come into shape, I think that they've got a real chance of moving up. It's just right now, not against Bay Area, against Rocky Mountain. They play Bay Area tomorrow. If they get a win over Bay Area on the 27th, then you start looking at them and saying, okay, this is who we thought they were, and now we have the track record and the evidence to show it. All right, moving on. Number 5, Lone Star Basketball Club, down 2 spots from number 3. The head-to-head loss here for Bay Area is what bumps them to here. I have really 3 through 5. My team's 3 through 5, and I think you could add Gotham 5 to that. So 3 through 6 are all very much one and the same. Depending on the day, my opinion of them is going to change. But Lone Star Basketball is number 5. I still like their backcourt. I should take that back. I love their backcourt. With the departure of Mikey Williams, I actually think that Jace Maguez and Eddie Gibson is the best backcourt in SimWorld Hoops. I have complete faith in Jace to carry a team. If you gave me DJ Wagner, Bronny James, and Jace McGinnis, you pick one of those three guys to close out a game, I'm still taking Jace McGinnis third, but I'm going to have to think about it. Okay? That is the type of game and season that Jace McGinnis has had. He is a stabilizing force. He can have big nights when he needs it, but he's a great facilitator of the basketball. Meanwhile, Lenny Gibson is an A-plus Robin that on the right night becomes a B-minus Batman. Okay? He's really good as the second guy. And there's going to be nights where he moonlights as the main guy, but you're not going to sit here and say that's the dude that we turn to when the game is on the line. It's still going to be Jace. They also have the big wins that we were talking about H-Town not having. They beat Southeast Select. They beat Showtime. They beat Best Coast Ballers. And the more the season goes on, the more I think those Best Coast wins are going to start being like, hey, what do we think of it? But they beat Best Coast when they were fully stocked with Mikey Williams, with June, with LDO. But they've only played one team I would peg as better than them, and they lost it. Okay, they played one game, and that was against the Bay Area Breakers, and they lost 66-58. That's what puts them at 5 and what puts Bay Area at number 4. Down 3 spots. They have been dethroned from the number 1 team in the Pointless Power rankings. Head-to-head win over LBC, as we just said. That's what puts them at 4. But their highs are super high. The LBC win, the Best Coast win on opening night. But their lows are kind of concerning. The asterisk smacking by Southeast Select. They lost by 10 to Beasts of the East. They couldn't slow down Showtime and Bronny James. Mentioned it last week that Bay Area has that closing, that little bit of inability to close a game that makes me wonder, but also at the same time makes me really excited, because the hardest thing is to start identifying trends, okay? And once you start seeing trends in anything, and we'll use SimWorld Hoops obviously as our example, once you start seeing these trends, it becomes exciting to watch it and get answers. Okay, you start watching the games and play out, and you say, this is what I think is going to happen because this is what's happened before. It's 7th grade science. We come up with a hypothesis, and we test it. Our hypothesis right now on Bay Area is they don't know how to close teams out, and they don't know how to win in the fourth quarter. And we have a handful of examples to prove that. Now we get a chance to start seeing if that's true. The next 2 games, Gotham 5, H-Town Hoopers, April 27th, obviously tomorrow, and then May 3rd. Hypothesis, Bay Area can't close games against good teams. We're about to put that further to the test against Gotham 5 and H-Town. Why is that exciting? Because it makes the game worth watching, right? You're not just showing up and saying, these 2 teams are good. I wonder who will win. You're saying, this is why I think this team could win, and this is why I think this team won't win. Let's see that specific thing play out. And if it plays out in a different way, that's of intrigue. That's where Bay Area's at number 4. All right, Beasts of the East. They're number 3 for me. They got a big win over Bay Area. Again, head-to-head, you look at LBC, Bay Area, Beasts of the East. Heck, Gotham 5 beats Bay Area by the time this airs. It'll be tonight when you're listening to this. They could get up to number 4. They could get up to number 3, but that's just kind of how we're playing it out right now. But the head-to-head wins by Beasts of the East over Bay, and then Bay over LBC gets us to here. Fareed Redmond continues to be a dynamic scorer. In that game against Bay Area, though, he was awful. But they had 16 from Camarion Goodyear and Levin Cutler. Plus Levin Cutler as a whole has been the bona fide number 2. 11 boards in that win, 3 steals. He's a high-impact defensive player, one of the better scoring bigs in SimWorld Hoops. But most exciting for Beast is this really, really impactful next 8 games, okay? And I think this might be the hardest 8-game stretch that anyone will play all season. Starts tomorrow or tonight, this is 27th, at Showtime. Saturday, they host the Originators. They go on the road for 2 games against APAC and AT Aliens before they travel to Texas, play Lone Star, come back, host a Gulf Coast team that's been playing well, before they head back on the road to visit H-Town and Southeast. That's 5 games. If we're looking at Showtime, OGs, Lone Star, H-Town, Southeast, that's 5 teams in this top 10 over the next 8 games. And the 3 games that are not, APAC has a signature win, AT Aliens has a signature win, and Gulf Coast has been playing well lately. This is a tough stretch. If they go, let's say, 5-3 over this stretch, I think it further proves their belonging at the top. If they struggle, we're going to move them down. But this is an exciting part of the season for Beasts of the East to prove how far they've come this season. Obviously, we're going to get a new number one, but at number 2, Rocky Mountain Monsters. They were number 5 last month. They've won 4 straight, including one over the aforementioned Beasts of the East. You want to keep talking about head-to-head. Blowout loss to Gotham 5, kind of concerning. And that was the 3rd straight game that they lost. But since then, they've sandwiched that 3-game losing streak with really good winning streaks. They have 4 scores of 10-plus points or more. Ireland Early, to me, is the type of guy at the end of the game that can score. He's the guy that you can turn to. And I've said it a ton of times, but my golden rule, can you win a championship? The answer to this equation of can they win a championship is, do you have a guy that can score on his own, in isolation, in the paint, and outside of it? If the answer is yes, you're a championship contender. Ireland Early does not have the counting stats of that guy, but I think he has the capabilities of that guy. But the system isn't built to provide that, okay? He can do that, but he's just like Gotham 5 has, a much more egalitarian approach that allows him to not necessarily be the only guy that's scoring. That matters, because if he doesn't have it, you've got other guys that can jump in and say, I'm hot tonight, let me cook. Kenneth Gaffney, number 4 in assists, more than capable of being the guy that steps in and makes big buckets down the stretch. Lucas Banks, Justin Bell, these are all their scores. You add Daquan McDougal, the 3rd. Those are their 5 guys that score 8 or more points. The first 4 are the guys that score 10 or more. And it's actually 11 or more. Ireland Early is the lowest of those 4 in terms of scoring. And I think he's the guy that you turn to at the end of the game to score a bucket. That says a lot about the depth that they have. But not only that, but the ability to in the clutch, score points, make the buckets that you need. And the number 1, like I said, I showed my hand on Tuesday. It's the Originators. 8 straight wins. They have, I would say, the best player in SimWorld Hoops. I don't think that's a hot take to say DJ Wagner, but I think people are going to debate that, but I'm going to take him. He's number 2 in scoring, and him, along with Dominic Bianco, are the only 2 players in SimWorld Hoops to be top 10 in both scoring and assists. You look at Kadarius Loftus, who had the massive game a couple weeks ago. I wrote down in my notes supplemental scoring, but it's explosive supplemental scoring. And then you've got Ilgauskas and Tyrone Snyder. They're both top 10 in blocks. No other team has that type of interior presence in the blocks category. Finish that statement. They are drastically impacting shots inside, not just blocking the shot, but also just deterring and making that shot difficult and ended up forcing a miss, whether they get a hand on it or not. So not only can they score in bunches on the outside, but they can defend on the interior and force you to become a 3-point shooting team. If that happens, that's a very difficult thing if you're not a good 3-point shooting team to overcome. And in their wins, that's what we've seen. They have overcome teams because they say, we're going to make you shoot from the outside. And we've got 2 guys in Wagner and Loftus who can defend well out there. They might not be lockdown defenders on the perimeter, but they're very good on the perimeter. And if you come in the paint, it's just a no-fly zone. That's why they're number 1. They haven't, though, been truly tested, okay? They're beating teams that they should beat, and they're beating them by a lot. That's why they're number 1. Big week coming up. Beasts of the East next week. Rocky Mountain, and then Showtime next month in the month of May. They win those, which I would pick them in all 3 of those matchups. That just further separates them. But the fact that they've been able to string together 8 straight wins is proof that this isn't just a, hey, we're good, we're beating the teams we should, and then we might stumble every now and again. They're showing up every single night. And I would argue, if we started to look at, and here's the hot take, turn on the camera, if we only took a sample size of when Coach Dodge took over what was New England last season, now the Originators, if we only took the start of her tenure in SimWorld Hoops and compared it across, she would be the best coach in SimWorld Hoops. She would be better than Coach Murray. She would be better than Coach Bilardi. She would be number one. And the reason we're not, this is no disrespect to either of those two, who I think everybody would consider to be Coach 1 and 2. The reason we don't is because under the previous regime, prior to Coach Dodge, New England at the time, a little voice crack there for you, New England at the time was mediocre at best. So their final record was not as impressive compared to Coach Bilardi, Coach Murray. Now, given that season and this 9-game stretch to begin the year, or is it 10 games, I guess, right? Let's confirm that number for you because we care about it. 10-game stretch to begin the season. Coach Dodge is the best coach in SimWorld Hoops. All right, have a great weekend, and we'll see you on Tuesday.